Hello, this is Lauren Delsack, and welcome back to the Draconic Chart. If you've been experimenting a bit with the Draconic Chart, you should notice that, again, all the planets and the points in the Draconic Chart fall into the same position as they do in the natal chart. The only difference that we see is that the planets and the points in the Draconic fall into different degrees and signs of the zodiac. You can study the Draconic chart alone just as you would the natal birth chart. So in other words, whatever techniques that you use to analyze a birth chart, you can just apply those same techniques when you're looking at the Draconic chart by itself, because the planets and the points will fall into the same houses. You're just bringing in different signs and degrees of the zodiac. And again, the relationship between each planet and point will be the same. A square in the natal will still have a square in the Draconic. What will change in the Draconic chart when you look at it by itself is the houses ruled by a particular planet. For example, in my natal chart, the Sun in Aquarius rules the 4th house, with Leo on the cusp of the 4th. But in my Draconic horoscope, the Sun in Virgo, which is still in the same house, in the 10th, conjunct the midheaven, it now rules the 9th and 10th houses, with Leo on the cusp of the 9th and the 10th. Experiment with that and see what you come up with in terms of house rulership. Let's take a look at other important factors that you could focus on within the Draconic chart that you also focus in on in the natal horoscope. The Aries point, which is the final degrees, let's say 2 degrees of mutable signs and the first 2 degrees of cardinal signs, will always be an important point in either horoscope. The Aries point is prominent, it is intensified, it is brought forward and usually projected publicly to others. Now we could think about that in the Draconic chart as saying that the Aries point, or planets and points falling at the Aries point, will be visibly intensified, and perhaps visibly intensified patterns of our higher self. Maybe they are patterns that are prominent in our past, along our soul's journey over consecutive lifetimes. Think of these configurations at the Aries point as if they are ingrained within our true identity. If the Draconic chart is the status of the soul at the point of its entry into this current incarnation, then any planets or points at the Aries point must be paramount in our identity's development within this lifetime. What qualities do they add to our growth? How do they help us, or how do they hinder us? How have they been integrated in our life? Now keep in mind that the Draconic technique will by definition place the north node, the nodal axis, on the Aries point at 00 Aries and the south node at 00 Libra. Therefore, in the Draconic chart, all Aries point planets or points will be strongly configured with the Draconic nodal axes. So if in the natal horoscope a planet is within 2 degrees conjunct the north node, or opposed it, or squaring it, in the Draconic chart, that planet will also fall on an Aries point. Let's look at an example of this with the horoscope of Prince. Musical artist Prince has Draconic Neptune in Aries at the AP, the Aries point. Now the sign of Aries is going to add energies of leadership, pioneering, and exerting force through anything, in this case Neptunian, such as the imagination, vision, creativity, pretending, dressing up, something other than it seems, acting, performing, showbiz, the arts, as well perhaps spirituality and metaphysics. When Prince first came onto the scene, he used to attract a lot of attention by wearing very colorful clothes and also high-heeled shoes and boots. So we get the sense of that dressing up and pretending, and you should know enough about Prince to understand how Neptune here in the Draconic could appear at a point that would be so publicly visible. But in order to take the interpretation a little bit deeper, we can consider additional factors such as the house rulership and how that planet at the Aries point is configured with midpoint pictures. Now you can locate the Aries point quickly using a midpoint sort, a 90-degree dial, for example. So in Prince's Draconic chart, the Aries point equals Neptune, which also equals the midpoint configurations of Mercury-Mars and Venus-Jupiter. The Mercury-Mars midpoint suggests a tendency to exaggerate or to magnify, and then this resonates with his Draconic Sun-Scorpio-Moon-Leo blend, as sensationalism always seems to be just around the corner. The Mercury-Mars midpoint also connotes energized thinking, powers of thought, and achievement of successes through the spirit of enterprise and the power of determination. Highly regarded as a musical genius, Prince writes, composes, and produces most of his music himself, as well as playing most of the instruments on his albums. He is also well known for writing songs for other artists that have skyrocketed to the top of the music charts. Incorporating the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, we can add public, artistic success and popularity. And overall, Neptune configured with Mercury-Mars, we get fantasy is channeled into creativity. So all of this being at the Aries point is something that would be shown publicly. It would be intensified. Looking at another example with a Draconic planet at the Aries point, comedian and writer Johnny Carson, the host of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, he has Draconic Sun in Gemini on the Aries point, which would signify a public projection to become well known for communicating, for being bright, clever, and witty. His Draconic Aries point Sun is configured with the midpoints of Moon midheaven, Pluto midheaven, Jupiter midheaven, and Mars Saturn. So his public professional position promises recognition, success, power, the spirit of enterprise, the illumination of a sense of purpose in life, endurance, and great exposure for everyone to see. And finally, the example comedian and actor Eddie Murphy, who has Draconic Pluto on the Aries point. His Draconic chart then shows Aries point Pluto equaling Mercury-Uranus, Sun-Saturn, and Venus-Mars. The Mercury-Uranus midpoint symbolizes astuteness, inspiration, provocative ideas, and inventive thinking, a revolutionary spirit and mind with a talent for speaking. And Pluto configured with it adds tremendous power for work, action, and leadership, getting the biggest job done in a commanding way. In many of Eddie Murphy's films, such as The Nutty Professor, he displays his brilliance at playing multiple roles in addition to his main character. So we can add perseverance and illumination of ambition with the Sun-Saturn midpoint, as well as artistic creativity and passion with Venus-Mars midpoint. Pluto at the Aries point will always suggest the potential for public power as a pioneer. In the sign of Aries, it's going to add dimensions of leadership and exerting force. So together we get an intensified public search for leadership to exert force through reforming or pioneering. And we see through Murphy's Draconic Sun, Scorpio, Moon, and Gemini blend how deeply organized control energies give the socially pleasing behaviors of communication, diversification, and humor a great deal of substance and anchor. So to wrap this segment up, keeping it under 10 minutes, take a look at the Aries point in the Draconic chart, pull up a midpoint sort, a 90-degree dial, and see what you come up with. Thank you for listening.